We've learned how to do equal opportunity criticism. It's like, congratulations, we know how to criticize the right and the left. Good job. But where's the equal opportunity praise? Where's the actually just taking the insights from wherever they come from and weaving them together into a bigger picture? That's what I feel like is sometimes lacking in the heterodox space.
Welcome to the Unspeakable Podcast. I'm your host, Meghan Daum. My guest is Stephanie Lepp. Stephanie is one of the most interesting and I would say one of the most difficult to categorize people working in the so-called heterodox space these days. And I say so-called heterodox because she has some complicated thoughts about that term, as do I. Stephanie is an artist and a producer, mostly a video producer, who was on the podcast back in July 2022 to talk about a project called Deep Reckonings. In that project, she considered people who had been embroiled in scandal or just made serious mistakes and then not responded ideally or at all, and imagined responses that would have conveyed genuine learning. Now she is back with a new video series called Faces of X, and that name came before Twitter became X, which illustrates how an argument using a single performer can be put forth by having that performer act out three different parts of the thesis, antithesis, synthesis schematic. Are you following? It's a little hard to explain, which is why I'm going to show you excerpts of a couple of the videos in the course of this conversation. Just a note, at one point I say we're going to play a 5-minute clip. It's actually more like a 1-minute clip. If you're listening on audio, you should be able to get a good sense of the videos in the course of this conversation. Stephanie and I talk about why it is so hard to check your confirmation bias, even when you pride yourself on being able to do so. We talk about the difference between synthesis and both sidesism. And finally, we talk about why she's optimistic about the future of public and private discourse about complicated issues. It's a great conversation, so here it is. Here's Stephanie Lepp. Stephanie Lepp, welcome back to The Unspeakable.
Thank you, Meghan. It's great to be back.
You were here a couple of years ago. Was it 2 years ago? We were talking about Deep Reckonings. Yeah.
Yes.
So Deep Reckonings, if anyone hasn't been, if anyone's relatively new to the podcast, they should go back and check out that episode because that was a fascinating project you did maybe you should explain it a little more before we go into what we're here to talk about today.
Sure. Yeah. Deep Reckonings is a series of explicitly marked deepfake videos that imagine morally courageous versions of our public figures. So if Brett Kavanaugh, for example, had a reckoning with the way he responded to the sexual allegations against him, what would he say? And what would that look like? It's absolutely explicit that these videos are fake, not just because I'm not interested in deceiving anybody, but because it's kind of part of the power of the medium is that you can know it's fake and it still influences you. And This is not parody. I'm not throwing anyone under the bus. I think I actually make Brett Kavanaugh look pretty amazing.
Yes,
you can hear our conversation.
It was his best self.
It was his best self. Many things to, epistemologically, technologically, ethically, but the kind of overarching question of the project was, how might we use our synthetic selves to elicit our better angels?
Right.
The tagline of the project, how might we deep fake it till we make it?
Yes. And we should say you were using AI to simulate his voice in a pretty uncanny way. No, that was actually
an actor. This was early days.
Oh!
This is like a universe ago with respect to AI. It would be so much easier now. Now I can just feed AI the whole project and say, all right, give me deep Putin.
That was an actor?
Yeah.
Wait. Okay.
These were voice actors. And I also actually chose to do that. I could have, but for ethical reasons and financial reasons, actually too. I did work with actors. Now the cost would be a lot lower and it would be so much easier. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
So
all right. Anyway,
stay tuned.
that's not
Maybe
what we're
there
here
will
to
be
talk
more.
about. Okay. All right. So for the
Yeah.
purposes of this discussion, we're talking about this amazing series of videos that you've put together called Faces of X. And why don't you just describe it? It's better you than me. Tell us how you got this idea and what
the
it
next
is.
series of videos. Yeah. So what is Faces of X? So yeah, if you wanted to help people transcend binary thinking, red or blue, woke or anti-woke, what would you do? Faces of X is one answer to that question. So it's a series of short videos that integrate different perspectives on culture war issues like gender, abortion, and race. The format is very simple. I use the Hegelian triad of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. It's the same person playing all three. So, the thesis and the antithesis, like pro-choice and pro-life, are going back and forth, debating, steel manning both sides of the debate. And then synthesis, again, the same person walks in and attempts to integrate their views into what we might call a synthesis perspective. So the format is very simple, but hopefully the synthesis is rich, and perhaps in the conversation we can talk about how synthesis is different from centrism and both sidesism and even heterodoxy.
Okay.
The series stars, maybe I'll just say it, the series stars cultural influencers who are known as independent thinkers on these issues. But yeah, the last thing I'll say is just Faces of X is not really ultimately about the individual issues. It's ultimately about cultivating our capacity to integrate different perspectives and see politics and ultimately reality in a more multidimensional way.
And we should say the topics are gender, race, capitalism, and abortion.
Keeping it light. Yeah.
How did you choose those
just the first
four things? Yeah.
So obviously the potential pipeline is infinite, right? I'd love to faces of free speech, faces of guns, faces of AI. I mean, you could faces of feminism. I ended up going with it was the first stars that I could kind of like land on, because that is kind of a critical piece of this. So that's really what drove which four I started with.
You mean the people, the actors featured, the figures featured in the videos?
Yeah, and they're not actually paid actors, which is what makes this more challenging and interesting. I think actors would be easier to find, but this is like finding the right voice who and granted, like, you could levy criticisms at all of these, like, are they really synthesis? Like, aren't they pushing, but the fact that they were willing to do this unpaid, taking a look at the script, steel manning the different sides, I think is a testament. Already that was it's like, are you even willing to do this is already an excellent filter for the kind of mind that I was looking for. So, but yeah, that's what drove the first four.
Okay, so let's just get into it.
The next one, actually, I do have the star for Faces of Feminism, so that that one is going to be next. Yes.
Okay, all right, I want to play the first video so people have some context, and then maybe you'll tell us. I don't know if you can give away who the feminist face is, but hold that thought, and I'll grill you about that in a second. Okay, so the first one, if you're listening at home, you're going to hear the audio. If you're watching this on YouTube, you're going to actually see the whole video. This is a discussion about gender, and it is starring Buck Angel, who has been a guest on this podcast. Buck is a trans man, meaning he's biological woman who transitioned as an adult and is very active around discussions and talks a lot about protecting the rights of trans people while also being cautious about transitioning kids. So he's a kind of he's a controversial figure, extremely heterodox. In the gender space,
I would call it synthesis. Yes.
Okay. Exactly. Yeah. We're going to talk about the problem with the term heterodox in a bit here. Okay. All right. So let's play the video. It's about 5 minutes long, so you guys are in for a treat, and then we'll talk about it.
Here we go.
Okay.
Well, then let's talk about the highest stakes of all, our kids. Kids are making irreversible changes to their bodies, which could lead to infertility. Premature medicalization can be devastating. Listen, puberty can only be altered during puberty. That's called science. But if you're worried about premature medicalization, try being more inclusive so that young people who feel uncertain about their gender identity don't feel pressured to medically transition. Gentlemen, females, friends. We're talking about three interrelated things: biology or sex, culture or what's often called gender, and psychology or identity. One of you thinks what a woman is entirely determined by a person's sex, while the other thinks a woman is defined by whatever gender they identify with. In other words, one of you is leaning exclusively on biology, while the other is leaning exclusively on psychology and culture.
All right. So, first of all, beautifully shot, beautifully acted by Buck.
Thank you. Yeah, go Buck.
Yeah. I want to talk about the costuming. I want to talk about your production design, everything. But first of all, just for those who are listening at home, and again, not watching the video, we should say all three of these parts were played by Buck Angel, and they're dressed differently. So the gender activist is wearing like a looks a little bit social justicey, slightly. I don't know, pretty light touch. The more conservative, gender critical Buck is wearing like a kind of sweater, kind of Palm Springs kind of. I don't even know.
Glasses.
Yeah, he looks a little more conservative. And then the person who comes in for the synthesis is, I'm not quite sure how to describe that.
He's got his trampa hat on.
Exactly. He's wearing a signature,
kind of like a colorful, funky shirt.
Yes, trampa
bringing
hat.
it all together.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So you wrote this script. You wrote all of these parts.
Yes. But again, given that these are not paid actors, it's like I brought them a draft, and then we workshopped it together. Yeah. And we learned a lot from each other for all of these issues. It was a very mutually enlightening process of working on the scripts together. Yeah.
So how long did this take? Like, how did you get this all together? And what were your initial discussions with Buck like as you talked about the script and then developed it?
Yeah, Buck, this is fun to get to go behind the curtain. I haven't really talked about this anywhere. Buck, amazingly, I just reached out to him directly and he responded. I didn't even try to go through I didn't even know if I knew people in college. I just reached out directly, his email, and he responded. And I don't remember exactly what I wrote, but I guess something about the way that I explained, piqued his interest in terms of trying to integrate different perspectives and articulate some kind of synthesis that a larger ideological diversity of people would be able to get on board with. But that said, I think I can say this multiple times over the course of the process, he got nervous that he kind of like wasn't synthesis enough. And he was like very much too far on one side or the other, which is part of why I decided, although I think I kind of already had this decision, that there should be a little like dropping of the fourth wall a little bit, which is what he's like, you know what? I don't know if I'm the right person for Faces of Gender. He just admits it. He just comes out and says it. And that is very honest, and I don't know. I feel it's like nobody's perfect anyway. We're all works in progress. And this coming from him, I just feel it's just like the right message from like kind of a perfect messenger at the right time. So like nobody's perfect anyway. And if this for him was kind of a stretch, like even better, it's like growing in public, right? Like being able to kind of stretch your views in public. I feel like it's such a rare and admirable thing. Glenn Lowry is kind of like the epitome for me of someone a public intellectual who is actively growing in public. So, but yeah, the process definitely was a little circuitous. I thought I was going to maybe have to find another person at one point. But I think it came out beautifully, and I'm very impressed with him. Yeah.
What did you learn about this issue in the course of working with Buck?
Oh my gosh, I learned so much about every single one is the truth. Yeah, it's like in the beginning, before going into the script, I thought I knew where I stood on all these things, right? And inevitably, you just start peeling back layers of the onion. With respect to gender, I think I guess there's kind of two things. One was in an earlier draft of the script, it said something like, "Let young people experiment non-permanently." Like, try on different clothes, try on different pronouns if you want to, but perhaps irreversible body modification should probably be reserved at least until the age of consent, except in rare evidence-based circumstances. That's still in the script. And I think I've actually I took that out because I don't actually know where I am on pronouns anymore. I used to think of that as a non-permanent way to experiment,
as a part of social transition.
Yeah, it's like try on different clothes, try on different pronouns, but like let's wait until the age of consent to do any kind of irreversible body modifications. And now I'm wondering if I might be at age of consent or something like that on pronouns, because I have two kids, 7 and 4. The 7-year-old has been asked for her pronouns in certain contexts, and it's very disorienting. And the way I've always kind of thought of like Disney movies, like I'm fine with the old ones where it's like good versus evil and it's very black and white. And I obviously also love the new ones that are much more gray, and maybe it's not so much about, maybe the bad guy had his heart stolen for, Moana had her heart stolen for, or whatever it is. So it gets more complicated, but I don't want to turn all black and white into gray. I want to let's start with black and white. And then when it's developmentally appropriate, we can introduce gray. I don't want to turn all black and white into gray, because then we've collapsed two shades into one. I also don't want to start with only gray. Like, I want some black and white too. So I feel like I may be moving on. I don't know fully where I am on pronoun. I no longer think of it as just like an innocent, non-permanent way to experiment. That's a big deal to introduce that question into a mind.
Yeah.
So that, and then I can say one other thing I feel like I've changed on with respect to gender is I think I just hadn't realized the extent to which there are just so many kind of confounding forces. There is social media, right, which drives poor body image. So here we are just like thinking negatively about our bodies. There's profit-driven healthcare, which is driving, over medicalization, et cetera. And then meanwhile, we're expanding the definition of manhood and womanhood. We're like dealing with, working out these stereotypes to the point where, like, if we were to work out, like, fix the social media and healthcare and just fully expand the definitions of man and like get rid of the stereotypes, like, this is such a non-PC question, but like, would there even be a trans phenomenon? I don't know. Wow. I don't actually know the answer to that question. I do know, however, that like at the end of the video, it does say something like gender transition will always be the right path for some people. I don't actually know if that's true anymore. If we, but I do know that these are things we should absolutely work out. Work out the social media, work out the incentives in healthcare, expand the definitions of man, and then we'll see where we land.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know, but that is absolutely, I do know that is work that needs to be done.
I think your evolution is consistent with what I hear from a lot of people who follow this issue. I mean, myself included. I would say, 3 or 4 years ago, I would have said social transition, fine. Pronouns, what's the big deal? It's no skin off my nose to respect your pronouns. I would have even said the majority of kids will desist or outgrow this dysphoria, but there is a very, very tiny minority for whom, transitioning or, medicalizing in childhood might be appropriate. I would be extremely disinclined to say that now. I've also had people, talk to me pretty persuasively about why social transition is confusing and actually makes things worse for kids. So yeah, but now was your thinking?
I mean, the way
was it evolving?
sorry, just to like.
Yeah.
one, like, I think the way that I, like, the simple way I would think about it now is like, we, like, just create the conditions conducive to people making this big choice with like the utmost sovereignty. You know, it's
Sovereignty,
like, let's
how
do
so?
that. Like, not being driven by like poor body and, you know, social, like, not being driven by all of these other kind of like perverse factors and perverse incentives, but like legitimately driven by like a clear sense of who I am and who I want to be. You know, like, yeah. So like, I think it's like, to the extent that we can create conditions conducive to that decision being made in a more like self-dignified and sovereign and confident way, yeah, that decision might be made less frequently or maybe never, but like, that is what I would consider the work to be done.
Right. But it's so hard because no decisions are made in a void. I mean, everything we do is informed by the culture around us. So it would be hard to tease that out.
Yeah, but I see that as like a different goal or a different frame than like, you know, however just like one side of this issue would articulate what we're trying to do here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like, what we're trying to do is kind of create the conditions for that decision to be made with like, you know, with utmost sovereignty and clarity, which right now it's really not. You know. Yeah.
Where have you been releasing these videos and what kinds of reactions are you getting?
Yeah, so this is all over the internet. It's Substack, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. The response, you know, I've been very surprised. This project is so easy to criticize. It's like one side, the other side, the integration. But it's also just so rare online to just kind of like see all the different perspectives, not just like steel-manned, all of them, but in this case, I'm simplifying to two of them. But then some kind of an attempt at integration. So the response has actually been much more positive than I expected. The most common theme in the comments has been something like, "Thank you for showing me the inside of my brain."
Wow.
Yeah, because people are already kind of experiencing this and they're just not seeing it reflected back to them in a lot of the media that they consume. So yeah. It's been surprisingly positive.
With the gender stuff, it's so polarizing and it's so emotional for so many people. Have you had criticism that it's like not gender critical enough, or it's not, you know, trans inclusive enough? Like, what have you heard specifically from people?
The criticism on that one, which I knew was going to come, is about Buck. And Buck gets it from all sides, right? Which is kind of how you know that you're doing something interesting, right? My joking tagline is something like, least disliked by the most diverse people who cannot agree on anything else, right? It's like, if everybody dislikes you the least, then you're onto something. Yeah.
They dislike you the least. Okay. You're the least bad choice. Right.
You're the least bad choice among people who otherwise can't agree on anything.
Okay.
All
right. I feel like that might be what's happening with the Democratic Party, but okay, that's a that's a side note, perhaps. Okay. So, like, in terms of this issue, I mean, I don't want to spend too much time here because I want to talk about the other videos, but listeners of this podcast are very interested in this topic. And again, it's something that I think that people feel differently about this year than they did last year because more information is coming forth. The cast review, I think, shed a lot of light on things in a way that was palatable for people and that really, you know, was pretty calm and not obviously ideological, and people are able to sort of settle down a little bit. And I think more people are speaking up about this issue, but it's so fraught in part because the emotions are so revved up, and also just the way it's been handled in social media and in even regular media, whatever that means, is really irresponsible.
Yeah.
So what do you, I don't know exactly what I'm asking, but like, do you have any hope for this issue? Obviously you do, because you've made this video, you've done this project, but like, where do you think we're going with it? And where do you think we are at the moment?
I think the European countries are already moving in that direction. I think we're just a little behind. You know, we are more polarized. And I feel like they sometimes kind of like process our culture war issues for us in a way and like export them back to us, you know, a little bit more processed. So I think they're already, you know, on all of these issues, actually with abortion too, it's similar situation in Europe. So I do have hope. I think as it is said, evolution is beautiful, but it's not pretty. Like, this is a messy process, you know. But yeah, I think just the growth of even the heterodox space is a testament to people seeking more nuance and complexity. And I think especially younger people find the tribalism boring. It's like, how boring is it to know what the person is going to say just based on what channel it is, you know? It's predictable. So right. I do feel hopeful. I kind of operate at the cultural level though, but I do feel hopeful at the cultural level. And then, you know, I do think culture is upstream. So I do think it finds its way into policy.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about another one of these. We should say you got really interesting people to act in these videos. The one we're going to talk about in a second, you are the star of. But before we get to that, can you tell us who the other people, who are the figures in the capitalism video, for instance, and in the race video? Who are these people?
So capitalism stars Liv Boeree. She is a brilliant expert in game theory, former professional poker player, science educator. She's beautiful, excellent communicator. And she's kind of the public spokesperson for Moloch. We don't really need to get into that fully, but the phenomenon whereby we sacrifice long-term well-being for short-term gain. So arms races, tragedies of the common, situations where rational individuals are choosing the rational thing, but in so doing, creating an outcome that is suboptimal for everyone, including themselves. She is kind of and that has obvious relevance to capitalism. But with that too, she kind of had a schizophrenic relationship with capitalism, actually, and it was working on the script together that kind of helped her like find her place with it. So Liv Boeree, Faces of Capitalism, Faces of Race is Magatte Wade. She is an entrepreneur and author and proponent of prosperity in Africa. That's kind of her main focus. She was born in Senegal. She is an American citizen. Abortion was not supposed to be me, but the person who it was bailed at the last minute. So I pinch hit.
Oh, goodness.
Somewhat reluctantly. But So,
okay.
What can I say about my relationship with abortion? I mean, I've never had an abortion. I didn't, so I don't know that I don't have like a personal relationship or kind of, this isn't like an issue that I have focused on in my, you know, public speaking or in my work. But maybe also because of that, I was more, I do feel, I was very open to learning about it. And I learned a lot about it, you know, talking with Christian ethicists and just, you know, so my mind definitely expanded on abortion in this process.
Yeah. That's an issue that I'm less dogmatic about than I was when I was younger. I was one of those people who, you know, liberals that grew up just assuming that anybody who favored abortion restrictions hated women and wanted everyone to be pregnant, and was just, it was purely driven by some kind of like mean-spirited politics. But that's extremely reductive.
Yeah. And it is, I mean, some people maybe do, but that's the extreme. And then there's also people on the extreme who just, let's say, like, want to treat abortion as just another form of birth control and just shout your abortion. Like, so yeah, what I'm trying to do is like put the extremes together on one side and then like put the, just reframe the sides of the debate.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, if you can stand to watch yourself, let's watch the abortion video.
The truth is, even Ruth Bader Ginsburg had issues with Roe. And that's because the Supreme Court rules on questions of the Constitution. And the Constitution says nothing about abortion. So abortion is not the Supreme Court's business. If you want access to abortion, pursue it democratically. Build public support and get some laws passed. Abortion is no longer the Supreme Court's business. Roe was overturned, and so we are pursuing abortion democratically. And our democracy is saying, even in conservative states, that we want abortion rights. Has anyone ever told you two that for having such different opinions, you really do look a lot alike? Anyways, are you pro-choice or pro-life is not a good question. You can't really be anti-choice or anti-life, right? Not really. No. Perhaps a better question is, how should states navigate the trade-offs between the rights of a developed individual, a woman, and the rights of an emerging individual, a fetus?
All right, you have a more sanguine view of the system than I do. We're going to leave this to democracy to figure this out. Now that abortion has gone to the states, this is we're all gonna figure out how to come to some consensus,
or not. We'll move in a certain direction, and that's kind of what we've seen in Europe. I think we just need to like start moving democratically. And doing it democratically is just better political strategy, and it's better cultural strategy, right? Because it does build more public consensus along the way. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually think so too. I mean, this is something I talked about on my other podcast with Sarah Hayter. We talked about the Dobbs decision when it happened, and we didn't make a lot of friends by saying this, but it was actually, there's a lot of short-term pain that's going to come from this, but in the end, it's really the only way to reach some kind of sane and practical approach.
And that is exactly one of the ways my views kind of expanded on. It's like, I didn't fully realize, I don't think I even realized that Ruth Bader Ginsburg herself had misgivings about Roe.
Yeah. She said it was on a collision course with itself. Roe.
Yeah.
The decision.
Yeah. So the fact that there are people who are pro-abortion rights and anti-Roe, I mean, that just says so much, Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So how hard was it to write these scripts? They're really involved. It's like you're sort of writing you're writing 3 term papers per video in a way, because you've got the 2 positions and then you've got the synthesis, analysis. So how long did it take you, and was it excruciating?
It was very hard and very fun. This is the way I have fun, Meghan. What can I say? Imagining Brett Kavanaugh's crisis of conscience, articulating a synthesis perspective on race. This is literally what I do for a good time. No, it was hard and it was very fun. The easier part is obviously just like articulating the two sides. I mean, simplifying it into 2 sides and trying to find the most kind of like important nuggets on each side and really steelmanning those and getting those. For me is like getting the ingredients on the table. And then once we have the ingredients on the table, then we have to bake a cake. Then we have to like make something new. So that's the synthesis is obviously the harder part. And it is kind of an art and a science. There were 3 questions that I asked myself with each, just as kind of a way in. One was simple questions. Is there an either or that can be flipped to a both and? So with gender, right? It's like, is it biology or culture and psychology, or can we acknowledge that they're all relevant and they're all important when we're trying to understand what a woman is and what a man is? So Is there an either or that can be flipped to a both and? Is there an opportunity to shift from what's better, X or Y, to under what circumstances, if any, is X or Y useful? Similarly with gender, under what circumstances? Sports is a competition between bodies, not a competition between identities. So there we want to lean on biology. So, and then the last question was the question of, are people on different sides of the debate being driven by perverse incentives, like, right, social media driven or for-profit healthcare, are driven by perverse incentives that, if they were addressed, would alleviate the debate? Because then that becomes something like we can all, no matter where we are on gender, we can all be on the same side. I think most of us, of wanting to not have social media, make us think so negatively about our bodies, right? So we can all be on the same side, or most of us, of the perverse incentives that are inflaming and like in some cases, distorting the debate.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to think about that because before social media, regular media made us feel bad about our bodies.
Totally.
Not necessarily in a dysphoric way, but in a dysmorphic way.
Totally.
I mean, there's a difference between body dysmorphia, which is like what we had growing up in the 80s. Everyone thought they were fat.
Exactly.
To dysphoria, which is thinking that you're in the wrong body. You have 2 kids. You have a 7-year-old daughter. She's not exposed to social media that much, I would presume.
No,
and
zero.
Yet she is being
Very
asked her
deliberately.
pronouns. Right. So she's being asked her pronouns. Where do you think this is coming from in terms of these small kids? It's obviously coming from their teachers who are exposed to social media.
It's in an aftercare activity. It was the aftercare program at her school that they had on the first day. Everyone go around and say their names and say their pronouns, and opt into a nickname if they wanted to. Which, so that I think it's coming from, it's coming from many places, one of them being the desire to be inclusive. That is one of the places it's coming from. But, and this is then under what circumstances is it appropriate to ask someone their pronoun? I just don't think 7-year-old is that circumstance. I think there are circumstances for sure, but an aftercare program for 7-year-olds is not one of them.
I mean, have they even been taught what a pronoun is? Have they had that kind of grammar lesson? I mean, I would be pretty impressed
if
they
barely learning nouns and verbs. Yeah. That's an excellent point. Like, thank you, Meghan. I love that actually, because I've been sitting with this question of like, when is it developmentally appropriate? But to your point, and that's so simple, I love it. It's like they literally don't even know what a pronoun is. Maybe you should know what a pronoun is.
I bet I bet most people would not know what a pronoun is. If not for this conversation. Yeah. People don't, nobody can diagram a sentence anymore. Yeah. Well, I mean, most people can't. Like, it used to be that you would know, like, what's a dangling participle or an article. What is an article? A or the. Yeah. But
the reason I know my daughter is like barely, I know what she's up to in school, but I also, we were at a friend's house and we did Mad Libs the other day. And that's when I fully realized how little I had to like trying to explain a noun and a verb, and pronouns might have been in there. But, so. Yeah.
That's hilarious. Well, so let's shift a little bit and talk about the state of the heterodoxy. So, and I know you've always been very rigorous in your thinking, about this kind of constellation of thinkers and people talking about culture war issues in a nuanced way. That's my whole brand. But you've also talked about a sort of knee-jerk anti-wokeism that we're seeing in this crowd often, and I worry about it a little bit, and I wonder how you're feeling about it these days.
Yeah, I do worry about it a little bit too. This is something I've brought up with Glenn. I think we have
Glenn Lowry, we should say. And actually, before we get into that, you have a long history with Glenn Lowry. So
I do.
Maybe give us a second of context there. Yeah.
Oh, of our relationship?
Yes.
Yeah, he taught my husband at Brown, and he has this kind of warm place in his heart for my husband's class. And so when I started Reckonings, I started a podcast probably in 2016 that told the stories of people who have made all kinds of transformative change. So a deeply conservative congressman who had what he would call a spiritual conversion on climate change, all the way to former white supremacists who transcended a life of violence, all the way to the architect of Facebook's business model who realized he was addicted to his phone and had a reckoning and has since devoted his life to tackling technology addiction. But while I was I was looking for people who had some kind of worldview transformation. And I think it was my husband who told me about Glenn. He is like the quintessence. So he was actually one of my very first guests on Reckonings. And I just happened to interview him at a time when he was getting started with his memoir. And he ended up kind of learning things about himself in that interview that were very helpful to him in his memoir. So he kind of credits me and we had like hours long conversations,
wow,
but with helping him kind of take a look in the mirror and, see certain things that helped him in his own self-reflections and self-discovery. Yeah.
And so we should say you recently did a conversation with Glenn about this project, and he pushed back, especially on the capitalism piece.
Yeah, totally legitimate. I mean, he had legitimate critiques, and, Glenn is a funny one because it's like he wants to not like this project because it's so pat, it's so simple, but there is part of him that he is a synthesis thinker. And so there is part of him that does love the spirit of the project. But yeah, where this, this kind of heterodoxy, I have expressed my concern to him that wondering, is he, once you are kind of, yes, it's great to be, always challenging and questioning. But if you're always kind of questioning in the same direction, or if you're always kind of rebelling it's like if you're kind of constantly doing the anti-woke thing, is it really heterodox? Is it really rebellious anymore? Is it really new anymore? So that's I feel like we've learned how to do the way that I kind of express it. We've learned how to do equal opportunity criticism. It's like, congratulations, we know how to criticize the right and the left. Good job. But where's the equal opportunity praise? Where's the actually just taking the insights from wherever they come from and weaving them together into a bigger picture? That's what I feel like is sometimes lacking in the heterodox space.
Well, the algorithm does not favor praise of any sort. I think criticism and owning the other side and, just dogpiling on people just generally is what gets attention and what gets clicks and what sells ads and gets subscribers and et cetera, et cetera.
I think that's part of it. But then there are voices out there like Lex Friedman who are just, and he's accused almost of the opposite, of kind of going too easy on anyone from any side. But I think there are examples of people who are doing the equal opportunity praise, and we can talk more about what that even looks like and, where that comes from philosophically. But that's part of why I'm getting, I think, a more positive reaction to Faces of X than I expected, because there is a hunger for this, I guess like a lot of the bridging world and the anti-pol comes from this, civility and respect. And I care about civility and respect. That's really nice. And I'm coming more from do you or do you not want to understand what's going on? Yeah. And if you want to understand whatever issue, gender, abortion, some complex thing, it behooves you to take the insights, no matter where they come from, and get the fullest picture possible.
Okay, I completely agree. But as my listeners have heard me say more than once, it's very difficult to have that approach when you are also dealing with a creative economy that is self-driven and reliant on a certain audience, finding your audience, retaining that audience, constantly feeding them what they need, it makes it very difficult. You want to surprise them. They think that they're there for, viewpoint diversity in a way, but they're kind of not. And I've noticed that the people, I'm sure you've noticed the same thing, the people who succeed the most on these platforms are pretty reliable with the opinions that they're going to offer.
Yeah. Well, tell me about your experience, if you feel comfortable, with your audience. What have you noticed, let's say, when you've kind of been more tribal or more post-tribal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there are topics that will reliably get a lot of traction. Gender is one. Culture war topics pretty reliably. But, I like to have, if I have an author on or I have something that has absolutely nothing to do with any controversial topic at all, people appreciate it. And certainly some people appreciate it a lot. And they say, oh, well, how refreshing. I want more of this. But it's not going to have like the viral potential, I think, of something that just feels like red meat. It's like, oh, I'm going to have this person on and they're going to talk about this topic in a way that makes me feel good. And you have to balance those things. So it's sort of like, if I want to have on like some literary author who is not going to talk about this stuff at all, I need to then kind of pay the piper and have somebody throw a little bit of red meat on, I mean, I'm not the, I'm pretty careful about it. And that's why my show is not, I don't have, Glenn Lowry's audience. We it's a trade-off, right?
Yeah. You think you're limiting your growth because you stay more nuanced as fuck?
I don't know. I mean, I don't want to, make excuses. I do this show because I want to talk with people who I find interesting about all sorts of things. I think it's a little bit, it's maybe not niche enough. Like I always say, the way to succeed in the independent creator space, whether it's a Substack or a podcast or whatever, is to be either super, super partisan, like really, really, just lean hard one way or the other, or be super, super, super niche, like something very specific, like not just knitting or embroidery, but a certain kind of knitting or embroidery, like something very, very specific that most people will not be interested in. But of those who are, every single person in the world who's interested in that will come into your audience, and then you'll have a big audience. So I'm a generalist. And I kind of just go with what interests me. And so I think the people who follow this show, they trust me to sort of be a curator of topics and of people to talk about those topics.
Yeah. So I do agree with you to a point, and I can even say, and this is another kind of behind the curtain. So the reason that this was an independent release, I did try to lock a distribution partner. I had great conversations with the New York Times, with TED. I am naming names here, with Time. There's one name I won't name, but, what I found, and this might be interesting to you and your audience, is that these outlets that kind of profess, like, finding distribution for what we might call pan-tribal or post-tribal content is naturally challenging because so many outlets are already associated with one side of the spectrum or the other. But even for these outlets that I just named that like profess a commitment to nuancing, like, seem to kind of reveal themselves to be actually more interested in both sidesism than synthesis. Like they weren't totally comfortable with the fact that the synthesis didn't land like exactly in the center. And it's like the center just lets itself be defined by the extremes. That doesn't seem like a smart way. I mean, if you're looking for balance, yes, obviously our media could be more balanced. But if you're looking for just like complexity, like you go where the truth is, you go where the insights are. You don't like say like, oh, well, you're over there and you're over there, so I'm going to land right here. And that was definitely an interesting kind of revelation for me. That that said, and so yes, I think you're right that and I hadn't heard the kind of that either super partisan or niche. That makes a lot of sense. That said, I don't know. I also just, I am talking about culture war issues here. So, I mean, you could consider this red meat. But doing it in a different way. And I see that way, like from even, I would put ContraPoints also in this, and we can talk about who that is. If your audience doesn't know her, but I see that content actually doing well when it exists, and people and I do see that there is a hunger for it.
Okay, so, that's a really interesting example. But before we get to that, can you state as concisely as you can the difference between synthesis and both sidesism?
Yes. Both sidesism assumes that each side is equally relevant or right or important or valuable. It is making that assumption. And synthesis just doesn't make that assumption. It's just taking the insights wherever they are and weaving them together. Like, so, here, I'll make an analogy. So if you're baking a cake, it's like flour and vanilla extract, like check yourself. Like, we could kind of do without you. We can't really do without the flour. That is like the basis, unless it's a flourless cake. But, so vanilla extract, it's like, have some humility. But you also, I mean, we need a tiny amount of you, but that amount still matters. So, both sidesism assumes that all the ingredients, it's like the same amount or something like that. Whereas the synthesis is like, no, we want to make a delicious cake. That's the goal. So that should drive the amount of which ingredient we use.
Okay. So was the sort of logic of these outlets that ultimately felt they couldn't collaborate with you that just agreeing on what is a delicious cake is in itself taking a position? Maybe
something like that. Yeah. And so it's safer to just have the same amount of every ingredient. And this might have not been conscious, by the way. They didn't necessarily say this to me. Yeah. And I hope I'm not getting myself into trouble.
No, it's fascinating because you would think that like the very smart individuals who work at these places, that's essentially how their minds are working. Like, I can imagine them sitting around at a dinner party, and unless they're just completely captured or there's something else going on, being able to have a conversation that is all about synthesis. Like, that is what is in their minds at all times. But somehow bringing this into a workplace economy and then the larger sort of media economy, we're not quite there yet. Is it that we don't trust audiences?
Yeah, that's part of it. And I also think just the like carving out of these different sides kind of like gives us and therefore we're kind of side driven in a way, rather than like delicious cake driven. Like in a way, Faces of X is like training wheels. Like eventually we can cut out the back and forth and just go straight to the synthesis.
But I think that the synthesis, tell me what you think about this, it requires being able to decouple logic from emotion. And I think people have a hard time with that. So I can imagine getting into a discussion. I can more than imagine it. I've had this happen many times. So have many people, like, getting a discussion about gender. And it's pretty clear immediately that the person you're talking to has got so many personal issues wrapped up in this that there's no way they're going to be able to hear what you're saying because it's so immediately threatening to them. And they just can't go there for whatever reason.
Yeah. I mean, this is why I think that 21st century media literacy needs to include first person epistemics, know thyself. It's like, know your biases, know your triggers, know that stuff, because that is the lens through which you are seeing the world. Knowing the other, right? Like second person, like being able to steel man the other perspectives. And then third person is what we usually think of as media, is like knowing the world, like fact checking and checking your sources. But I think we need all of these components, and knowing thyself is absolutely part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we're getting all tripped up, and like, and if you, and even if you just know which direction you usually get tripped up in, that can be very helpful.
It can also make you crazy, though. If you're constantly checking yourself, it will make you insane. I mean, it almost is a
Have
self-protective.
you experienced that too?
Yeah. I mean, I'm always like, why am I reacting to this? There was something about Kamala Harris very early on where she was definitely triggering something in me. I felt that she was very phony and performative. It wasn't just the laugh, like that's a sort of separate thing. There was something about her presentation and comportment that I was reacting to on a really visceral level. And I knew it was not rational, but I also knew that, or I sensed that if she became president, it was going to be very difficult for me to spend 4 years or 8 years
listening
having
to her.
this person constantly in my line of vision. That's kind of, but what was interesting about that is that I think I even like tweeted it. And as soon as I like articulated
why am I
it,
having this reaction?
I said, I'm having this reaction and it's going to be really hard for me to listen to this person. But the minute I actually articulated this, it started to lessen. Like, I don't really have this feeling as much anymore. There are probably going to be other things that bother me.
Yeah.
But I was reacting to her the way a lot of people, for instance, react to Trump. I mean, a lot of people who have had like a very authoritarian parent or have like a trauma history with somebody with that kind of personality type, they are absolutely unable to separate their own personal triggers with what's going on with him. And so I get that. And so I think I was having like a sort of mild version of that with Kamala Harris.
I think that's great. I mean, obviously you can take it too far and just, it's like navel gazing, but I do think we haven't even really included it or thought of it as part of what, would be kind of 21st century media literacy or critical thinking. It's just like knowing your own lens.
Yes, I totally. Right. We talk about critical thinking all the time and we talk about confirmation bias, but I think this is a huge point that we don't think about what it is about us emotionally that is making us have this confirmation bias. It's
so
all.
Yeah. Oh, just like a little like pet dream of mine is that. So, when the byline, like when you click on an author's name in an article, so that should link to their Reckonings episode. That should link to a story. It's a story of the evolution of their worldview.
Well,
it's
funny because
like what lens the story is being told, there it is.
Well, then everybody would have to have a Reckonings video. That's a very good business model for you.
That's exactly.
I mean, that's
really the goal here. Keep myself employed.
So on speakeasy retreats, and I know you've joined us for one. Last year we had during a retreat, one of the attendees said to me, what would be? We're talking at dinner, and she said, what would be really interesting for a discussion is like some kind of conversation about what makes us the way we are. What is the thing that has made us so sort of resistant to groupthink? Like, what is the emotional thing, or what is the kind of like DNA of our personality that led us to this place? It's not just like, this happened to me intellectually, or I noticed this thing in the news. Like, what is it in us emotionally and in terms of our temperament that has made us?
Do you know what it is for you?
So yes, it is. I am allergic to like performative bullshit. And I'm also like I think I grew up in a family that was like, there was a lot of acting as if, and there was a lot of insecurity about, belonging, like being very alienated from a community, not feeling secure. And so there was a lot of kind of putting on airs. And I'm very, very sensitive to that. And I see it in people even when they're not doing it. So, And so I think that's
project it.
I'm projecting it. And I'm also like, I'm hypersensitive to it. So I think that, obviously there's so many things that bring us to like the heterodoxy, whatever. But I think that like on an emotional level, it does have to do with just a total allergy to bullshit. And anyway, this has become such a great exercise. We usually do it because we start off the retreats, saying sort of like, what was the personal paradigm shift? Like this was Tara Henley's like framing. It was great. So we sort of, that's our first thing we often kick off with. And now we try sort of at the end of the couple of days to say, like, what is it that makes us this way? Like, what is it? Is it our parents? Is it like something, that happened when we were very small? Is it a sibling? Like, what is it? And it's incredibly illuminating.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel like, I guess kind of going back to the heterodoxy, I mean, do you feel like, you just said you sometimes project it when it's not there. Like, do you feel like it can sometimes get in the way? I mean, how do you feel about the state of, heterodoxy? Yeah. In relation to your own seeing and sometimes projecting bullshit.
I mean, I definitely, the sort of constantly going, but, oh no, it's not that way. What is the real story? What is the real truth? That is a reflex now. And so I do think that, like, there are people in the heterodoxy who have taken that to an extreme. And the thing is, it's working for them, though. Like we said it earlier, like that is a good business model. And the more sort of reactive and skeptical you get, the more your audience is going to love that. And you end up like just going down these rabbit holes and becoming completely blinkered. And thinking everything is a conspiracy there. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, what is that? Never attribute to conspiracy or malice what is explained by incompetence, right? Like, I think that, like, the central planning office is not organized enough to have, planned all these events. I think some things, it's a constellation of things. Like I would love to see you do a Faces of X about like some kind of conspiracy theory, or like how much of this is planned. COVID, for instance. Have you thought about doing one around COVID?
I have. I mean, I've also thought about doing Faces of Wokeness.
What would that look like?
It would actually just be it's like, there are some, thank you for waking us up to the plight of marginalized people everywhere. And the frame of oppressor oppressed is not always the most relevant frame with which to see every given situation. It's something that, like, thank you for the benefits, and it's not under all circumstances.
Right. But I think it goes the other way too. I mean, this is what you're saying, because I think that it's so easy to see wokeness everywhere that sometimes we ignore the fact that, there is an injustice going on here. Like there is, this person completely has a point that I didn't think of. Yeah. Why is it called X?
Oh, I know. So I named it before Twitter changed its name. And then, because I'd been thinking about it for a long time, I hadn't started working on it, but I went through a gajillion other names, parallax views and unflattening and just a million other not super great names. And I just finally came back around because it sounds real, like X is a frame in people's minds. It just sounds like something that exists. And it's actually meaning, like, we could think of this as Faces of Twitter.
I was going to say, because I thought maybe meaningful. Right. Talk about binary thinking. That's the locus
so what
of
I want to do Faces of Elon Musk starring Elon Musk. What do you think?
He might be up for it.
Elon the troll, Elon the serial social entrepreneur, and then Elon the Martian.
That would be amazing. I bet he'd do it. If you grabbed him at the right moment, he might do it.
I think so.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're rooting for you there.
Actually, maybe I should get your take on, the ending. The ending just is so kind of creatively unsatisfying, right? Because it's just like, and then the synthesis walks in, and then they're all happy, and then it ends. But the truth is, I mean, I think the question to ask is like, what would actually be going on? What would actually be going on is like maybe one of them who was, vanilla extract would be a little more pissed off or something, right? And so, but I don't know.
Wait, in the Elon Musk video or just generally?
No, just in general, the template, just in general, how it ends,
But I think it never ends. I mean, it's ongoing.
So
I mean,
just cut them off in the middle.
Because nothing. I mean, conclusions are so, they're just sort of choreographed, right? I mean, nothing, there's never, it's like, I say like in the history of the world, a whole story has never been told, right?
Yes. And I do. So yes. And a good synthesis just becomes a new thesis, right? In our evolving So you're totally right. There is no end. And so what I'm wondering is, therefore, do I just literally cut the person off in the middle of the sentence and just
maybe somebody's on their deathbed and they're still figuring this out, and they die like trying to with the synthesis argument. It's like it's still percolating,
pass it on to the next generation.
And then they just fade away to the next dimension.
The next dimension.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations. It's an extraordinary series, and it's always great to talk with you. And I appreciate this conversation a lot.
Thank you, Meghan. I appreciate talking with you. I do. I have this running list of people who I consider to be synthesis voices. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Catch me on a bad day and you'll take me off your list, but
no. We're all works in progress, right? But you're doing something that's rare and takes a lot of courage, and to your point, probably makes you less money. So thank you. We need it. And and may we transform our viewpoint diversity from a source of weakness to a source of strength.
Very inspiring. Thank you, Stephanie. That was my conversation with artist, producer, and overall innovative thinker, Stephanie Lepp. You can find her Faces of X series at facesofx.org, as well as the other platforms she mentioned. This is the Unspeakable Podcast. If you are not yet a member of our listener community on Substack and you want to get even more episodes, become a paying subscriber there. Go to meghandaum.substack.com and you will get 2 entirely extra episodes per month. You also get access to stuff I write, discounts on merchandise, and the ability to leave comments, all kinds of great stuff. So I would love it if you went over there. I can also tell you that the Unspeakeasy, my community for free thinking women and occasionally men under very special circumstances, is up and running. As always, we have retreats planned for 2025. So go to theunspeakeasy.com, find out about that, find out about our online courses and all the stuff we have going on. I will be back next week with another super nuanced guest. Thanks for joining me. See you then.